Good afternoon and welcome to Roth and Aggie Reviews. I'm Jacob Kobe Pekarsky. Today we're going to be reviewing a recent film that just came out about a week ago called The Conjuring Number 2. So The Conjuring is a movie that is a sequel to the first Conjuring that came out in 2013, in the summer of 2013. So you might remember it 3 years back. So this movie, The Conjuring Number 2, it's a sequel. It's a horror sequel. What do we have with that? Well, what we have with that is that a lot of people have a suspicion to horror films. Not so much with the fear, being scared of them, that kind of suspicion, but more to do with their authenticity and their success. But also there's another fear, and not fear again, but suspicion, skeptical, cynical attitude towards horror sequels. So let's talk about this movie. It's 3 years later, and it's The Conjuring Number 2. Okay, must say right now, it's a good movie. But why is it a good movie? Okay, let's get into details of it. In this review, I'm going to be discussing a couple of things. I'll be discussing the way the movie's made, the technical parts, the story, the story of the movie, and then number three will be just kind of minor other things, trivia, things like that. These two I'll be mostly focusing on, which are, as I said, story and technical aspects. Okay, so let's start with technical aspects. This movie is a sequel, right? But most of the movie takes place in a totally different environment. It takes place in 1970s London, England. Not exactly London, England, but a suburb of London. So somewhere in North London-ish. But anyways, big filming change. Because, with these kind of movies, a lot of horror studios today, they choose, not a lot, but they tend to focus on, current, North American horror locations within this time period. But now, in this movie, we don't only have 1970s, we have 1970s England. And a lot of horror films, a lot of horror films that are connected to studios, the studios usually don't have as much resources for the horror films when it comes to elaborate and detailed and unusual places and times. But here, what we have is good research, good continuity, and a good movie with all these things. Because this movie, with the authenticity, it comes across as actually being 1970s England. But why is that so important? On the film side, it's important because when you're making a film, you're trying, you're doing something to create basically a story that has to be as realistic as possible in terms of what it is. If it's a movie about an ordinary family that has a supernatural phenomenon, yes, it's horror. It might be fantasy, but it's supposed to be a fantasy coming out of a very ordinary situation, which would be like, 1970s England, everything's normal and then suddenly some supernatural thing happens. So I will give a good example. Paranormal Activity 3 had that 1980s feel to it. The movie was set in 1980s and the house really felt like it was in 1980s. The whole movie felt like you're in 1980s. Okay, so that's why it's important. It's important when it comes to the art of film. You got to do that. When you're making films, it's very important. And some people are so into that kind of job that it's beautiful because some people think, well, how am I supposed to know about 1970s England? Well, some people are just passionate about those things. And those are the kind of people that do that kind of job, and they do it well usually. And it makes for a great movie. And it gets guys like me who are really, detail obsessed, really happy. So thumbs up to that. So that was a technical bit. Now let's talk about the character, the story bit. In this movie, what I like is the fact that it's a horror film, and most horror films do not have the kind of, multi-dimensional story part to it. They just have a part to it that really relates to, the horror, the scare, the bad guy, the villain, and that's it. But in this movie, and this is just from my experience, and I think a lot of people relate to that, this movie has elements of comedy, and of drama, and of horror, of course, and also of coming of age. And why? It's a movie about a young family, a family of a single mother who's struggling to make ends meet, and her kids. and her kids are, in school, and one of the kids gets teased by other kids. He gets picked on because he has a stutter. This other girl, she's just, entering puberty, right? And that's got its, challenges. This other girl is friends with this girl that smokes and is just a bad influence. So everybody in this film is, every kid in this film has some sort of challenge that all of us as kids had growing up. And that's really important because in this film, we really explore how the character's weaknesses and growing up difficulties get affected by the entity that, as we know from these movies, they feed off negative energy and fear, anxiety, and just generally bad emotions. So why is this important? Well, it's important because it makes the authenticity of this movie bigger, and it makes the characters likable and relatable, and the stakes are so much higher. So with that being said, the movie feels like a drama at many times. It feels like a drama and a coming of age because these characters, these kids, they grow through the movie, and you feel for them. They're not only dealing with issues like being picked on and things like that, but also with this scary, monstrous force that is transforming their lives and making them scared beyond belief. That is very important with a horror film. I think that's one of the reasons horror films do so poorly sometimes. They only explore one angle of the film dimension, and the film dimension is like life. You have so many things to consider in life, so many emotions, so many thoughts, so many parts of the human experience. And this movie really captures it, and I think it adds another level to the horror genre, showing that the horror genre can do well and can show reality within the scares and within the fears of humans and all the things that are connected to that. Again, so on these two things, it's a good movie because it's got a good story. It's got characters that are very well very detailed characters, very good technicals, because again of the fact that it's so realistic. You feel like you are in 1970s England, and the horror films from 1970s, that decade was one of the best decades for horror films. And then on top of that, you have a movie that seems like a 1970s type film, The Exorcist, right? And then you have it with CGI of today. So you have a 1970s horror film with CGI of today. What a great combination, right? And also another thing that I want to just mention, this is just shorter, is the connection between Ed's character, Ed Warren. Ed Warren, he's the main ghost hunter in this film, played by Patrick Wilson, I believe. I could be wrong though, but I think it's Patrick Wilson. So Ed, and the main character, the girl, they have this strong relationship, but it's it's profound because at some points they really don't know what they're dealing with, and they're always there, and he's always there for that young girl who's scared, so terrified, and there's so many things in that relationship alone that makes it feel like it's a drama. I mean, the girl's father left the family for some small reason, but big enough to make a huge emotional scar on the family and on the girl. So again, great film, technically, story-wise, character-wise, and the lighting's great. I could go on with so many things that are great about this film. Bottom line is, you guys gotta check this movie out because it's good, and it shows you that horror films are good. They're done well, and sequels in horror films can be done well too. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you check it out if you haven't checked it out already. Thank you so much. Bye bye.